And I'd love to introduce our speaker today, who is Marina. So Marina is a planner with a background in environmental outreach and education and a strong passion for agriculture, both urban and otherwise. Studying at Ryerson University, she learned about the importance of reintegrating nature in the city and the power of growing food right in our communities. So her research focus during her degree was land use policy, supporting small-scale farmers. And complementary to her studies, Marina was also involved with several local organizations that bring food and people together. Currently, Marina is an area planner, and as a planner, Marina works to help create supportive policies for agriculture at all scales and in all contexts. In her free time, you can find her tending to her backyard vegetable garden or trying out new recipes with local produce. So thank you so much for the time today, and whenever you're ready, you're welcome to share your screen and go forward with the presentation.
Awesome, thanks so much. Let's see, let me figure out how to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see?
We can see.
Perfect. So I'll go into present mode and hopefully you can still see. All right. So yeah, thanks for that introduction, Janelle, and I'm really happy to be here talking to all of you about food and about agriculture and the importance of food in our cities. So I'm going to talk for about 9 or 10 minutes, and then if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask or throw them in the chat, or if not, we can just talk afterwards. So let's get started. Janelle already mentioned a little bit about who I am, but just as a little recap, I graduated from Ryerson University's Master of Planning program in April, and food has always been a very, very big part of my identity, even before I came to planning. And what is it that brought me to planning? I think when I was doing my undergrad, I was doing an undergrad in political science, and I worked on a lot of outreach campaigns at the time. I wanted people to vote with the environment in mind because that was something that really mattered to me. But the issues that I tried to get people to care about felt a little bit abstract and far away, like climate change. I mean, that's a big, scary, multifaceted problem that I felt like I couldn't do much about other than telling others about it. So I wanted to do something tangible. And actually, almost by chance, I ended up volunteering at the UBC farm out in Vancouver, where I'm from. Growing food was a big part of my family's traditions, and I was kind of removed from it at the time, but I thought it would be a really great way to get involved and do something really hands-on. I didn't know about planning at the time, and I definitely wasn't thinking about the connection between planning and food yet. But then when I went to Ryerson and I started learning about sustainability in the context of planning, I began to see the really, really important connection between cities and food that I had not seen explicitly up until that point. And so, as Danelle mentioned, currently I'm working as a municipal planner. I started working with the city of Quinte West about 2 months ago. That is a rural and urban municipality that's about 2 hours outside of Toronto. But throughout my program and throughout my time in Ryerson, it was really urban agriculture that I was thinking about, and agriculture in the context of cities. In fact, I was going to do my thesis on urban agriculture. That was my research focus. I wanted to, the city of Toronto has an urban agriculture plan, and I wanted to look at it and see whether the city was truly being supportive to urban agriculture initiatives. And I wanted to look at how it was implementing that strategy and the things that the city was doing. But then, I should have changed the slide here. So yeah, as I said, urban agriculture was sort of my area of interest. And actually that second circle that you see there with the little garden beds surrounded by stones, that's a picture of a community garden that my friend from school started on vacant land. And it was a very, very successful initiative. But as I said, even though that was what I was interested in throughout my program, I actually ended up taking an internship between my first and my second years that took me out of the city. It took me out of Toronto into Prince Edward County, where I spent the summer talking to farmers there. So obviously in a more rural context and learning about some of their issues and their challenges. I learned that a lot of young farmers who wanted to farm just couldn't because of a lot of barriers, including the high price of land. And a lot of the farmers that I talked to were small scale, were young people. And when I finished that internship, I really wanted to keep on learning how planning could help. So that's what I did. I ended up focusing my research not on urban ag, but on rural ag. So I guess the moral of the story here is throughout your education and life, keep an open mind because you never know where you might end up. But yeah, so my thesis was about looking at how land use policy could help small scale farmers like the ones that I'd met. And that's in a nutshell kind of how I ended up working for the city of Quinte West, where agriculture is a very significant part. But obviously, I still think about agriculture in urban settings a lot. But to talk about something other than me for a sec, let's quickly touch on this. What is a food system? You may or may not already know, but I wanted to touch on this briefly because it's something that's so important. And I'm going to switch the slide to this graphic here, which I really like. So what is a food system? I mean, basically in a nutshell, a food system is it's a complex and it's an interconnected network of people, of activities, of different resources that all work together to provide food. So from growing it, from production to helping it get to our plates, and ultimately sustaining communities. And it can get pretty complex. This is the subject of countless papers, lectures, and so on. And there is a lot of detail in this graphic, but I really do like it. And don't worry about some of that complexity, because for the rest of the presentation, what I want to focus on is production. And I want to talk about food production in an urban context, which, as you might be able to tell from this graphic, it's a small, but it's an incredibly significant part of our food system because cities have a role to play. And historically, food production's been a lot more integrated into urban life. And a lot of our historic cities up until maybe the 1950s were kind of shaped by food. I mean, think of the older towns with the market square at the center, or the gardens and the orchards that would dot the city that regular people kept, and often out of necessity. But it wasn't really until the first few decades of the 20th century that food sort of started to get pushed to the periphery of cities as the pace of urbanization and industrialization accelerated, which ultimately led us to rely on forces that are completely outside of our control to provide food for us. But more importantly, and I think more tragically, it led to a disconnect between food and people. And as a consequence, a disconnect between nature and people. So, like I said, when you look at this graphic, it's not necessarily clear the role that cities play in food production, but there are so many opportunities, and maybe there are initiatives that you already know of that are trying to reintroduce food into the city and to take advantage of the food that already exists in cities, which we often don't really think about. But as you can see on this slide, the benefits of introducing food back into the city go far beyond just this ability to feed ourselves. And I'll come back to this slide at the end again, because I think it's really important to really understand to understand the benefits of growing in our cities and of food in our cities. But in the meantime, I wanted to bring up 3 examples actually of instances of initiatives that are trying to do just this and to talk about them. And there are obviously many, 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 and maybe during our little Q&A, I can list off a few more, or if you know of any more that you'd like to share, that would be awesome. For now, this is one of my favorites. It's based in Toronto, not far from the tree. And it's a nonprofit initiative which aims to take advantage of the fruit trees that exist in our cities and the food that's already on our streets. The trees that were planted there long ago by individuals trying to provide for themselves that maybe we've forgotten about. And there are a significant amount of these trees. So on this slide right here, a number of years ago, a couple of students did some mapping in the city of Toronto. As you can see, this is a very colorful map. And the little dots, each of the dots represents a tree. And mind you, these are only the trees that are on public property. So not far from the tree actually works mostly with homeowners. So this would be the trees on private property, but the trees here, they're all capable of producing food for us, which when you think about how many there are, that's pretty significant. I believe it's about 500,000 trees within the city of Toronto that are capable of producing food. And again, that's not even taking into account the trees on private property. And the impact that not far from the tree has is quite significant. A lot of the food that its volunteers harvest actually goes to local community organizations and helps support them, which is quite remarkable. And then this is another really neat initiative happening in the city of Toronto, although I've seen similar things in other cities as well. So the Bori project, again, it's a nonprofit initiative that tries to reintegrate food into some of our underutilized areas into the city, and to reimagine vacant land, which most of us probably wouldn't really associate with food or wouldn't think of as being able to produce anything. The food that's grown, as you can see by these images, is grown in containers, and that's really great because in a city like Toronto, space is at a premium. There's not a lot of it. There's not necessarily a lot of public space available for food growing. And this growing in this way is a means of getting around that. Obviously, these gardens can be assembled really quickly. That's actually a really, really big plus, and probably one of the best things about growing like this is the mobility. They can be assembled, and then the gardens can be disassembled quite quickly to make room for a development, or for the redevelopment of a formerly vacant site. So it's a great way to take advantage of these sites while they're awaiting development, so that they don't sit idle. And then finally, the last example that I wanted to share with you guys, and the reason that I wanted to talk about this one in particular, because it really, I'll go back to that slide in one sec, but it really touches on a lot of the, or it embodies a lot of the benefits that urban agriculture provides, especially the ones that relate to our relationship, the relationship between people and between other living things, and social cohesion as well, because that is the primary goal of this project, the Intergenerational Landed Learning Project, which is based at the UBC farm in Vancouver. And I was involved with this project for a number of years. And the basic premise of the project is to partner with schools in Vancouver with students that are likely no older than yourselves, and to introduce them to older members of the community and to bring everybody together in the garden. And to allow people to share their experiences with one another, to share their knowledge, to allow some of the older folks to teach some of the younger students about their experiences with growing, because a lot of them know how to do that, and to share their worldviews. And it's a really, really powerful way to bring people of different generations together, and to grow food together. So coming back to this slide now, these three examples that I had were quite, you know, they were only a few of many different initiatives and examples of, you know, really motivated individuals and groups that are trying to reintegrate food into the city, and to share, or to share the power of growing. And I think it's important to recognize that urban agriculture can be really, really powerful, and it's really, really important, and it's maybe a part of the food system that we haven't necessarily paid a lot of attention to in the past. But while urban agriculture might not be able to provide food for every single person in the city, it can do so much more. It can provide food, and it can provide a significant amount of food. And it can reintroduce autonomy over food production. Earlier, I talked about how when food production was moved entirely outside of the city, it left us a little bit helpless. But growing in our urban areas can help us overcome that. And this is especially important for groups that may not be as privileged. For certain equity-seeking groups, food is often a lifeline. It's a really, really important way of regaining some amount of self-determination. And this is the big one. This is, I think, one of the most important things, and something that we're realizing is, you know, a priority right now, during and after COVID. The power of urban agriculture to bring people together, to strengthen community ties and social cohesion, especially between different generations. And the other really important one is to help us redefine our relationship with the world and with the living things in it. I think it's really important for us to bring nature back into our cities, especially in the face of some of the problems that we're dealing with, you know, related to climate change. So I think the big takeaway here is that we can't really have healthy, resilient food systems without all of us, including us who live in urban areas, participating. And there are so many creative ways to participate. Clearly, the groups that I've talked about have found really innovative ways to take part in the urban food system. And I didn't talk a lot about necessarily city initiatives and things that the city is doing, but I think it's really important as well for planners to learn how to support individuals who are working on some of these initiatives. And there are different ways in which planners can do that. If you're curious, I can share some of those ways with you. But I think for now, maybe we'll move on to our Q&A. If anyone has any questions about anything that I talked about or anything else, I'd love to hear your questions.